So one of our first comments was from Jimbo757, and he says, who cares what the WHO says? And here's a good point. I understand that a lot of people don't care what the CDC or the WHO or a lot of other folks say at this point. But here's the thing. I'm working with multiple large employers, and other folks, and I'm working with a lot of other docs who are setting up these programs as well. We all want to get the economy back. We all want to get it up and rolling. But if we just crash the gates, get out there, 2 weeks later, the number of deaths we're going to start seeing, I just don't think our culture can stomach what's going to happen. So we do need to start thinking, whether we want to or not, about what are some of the things that we need to be considering. And when you look at it, you look at Harvard Business Review, they're out there giving their thoughts on what you need in order to send somebody back to work. And guess what? It's almost one-for-one correlation with what you're seeing with WHO and what other folks are doing as well. I've got the folks that are actually, there are a lot of folks, for example, that are looking at military contractors, military activities, and so far they've just been looking at history because no tests have been available. But as the tests start to kick in, there will be a big set of discussions about, do we do 2 PCR tests and 1 antibody test, or 1 PCR and 2 antibody tests? Do you start off with an antibody test, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? Now, that's what we're going to talk about. The conditions that one of our, the World Health Organization has set up for this. And then again, we can have some discussion about it later. We're going to try to get this done a little bit quicker. Some of the previous topics that we talked about is who is immune, or upcoming topics. Carl thinks, for example, who is immune to the coronavirus? What does that actually mean? What does immunity mean to coronavirus? And he thinks that'll be more popular. Janice and some others responded to pregnant women and coronavirus. There were questions about that. I gave a couple of comments about it, but again, we'll get a little bit more definitive information on it. And by the way, the title is very, very clear. Pregnant women aren't having a lot of symptoms to coronavirus, and that's in sharp contrast to some of the recent previous seasonal flu programs we've had. And of course, we've had several different videos on COVID-19 treatments. If you have interest in any of the other topics that we've covered, COVID-19 and heart damage, unused coronavirus tests, are we hitting the peak? And what is the peak? ACE receptors, blood pressure medications, herd immunity, things like that. We've all got those. We've got those available. Unfortunately, most of those look like they're an hour long to watch. Really, the program component is only about 15 minutes. I talked with Carl earlier this morning about basically going in, should be a fairly simple editing job to go in and take the program piece and away from the Q&A and just offer the program components. One other thing, I think everybody's getting sick of dealing with COVID-19. We started doing daily a few weeks ago as a response to concerns. We're getting decreased viewership, decreased responsiveness. Assuming it continues to go that way, what we may do is decrease from now 5 days a week to maybe 3 days a week, maybe back to the old 1 day a week. That'll give us time to focus more on the real pandemic. And the real pandemic that's killing more folks than anybody, disabling more folks than anybody, is prediabetes, the chronic disease pandemic. Diabetes, high blood pressure, the things that have been killing us before COVID got here. And guess what? Now that coronavirus is here, the folks that are getting COVID-19, coronavirus or SARS-CoV-2 is the virus, but the folks that are getting COVID-19, which is the serious lethal illness are yet again those same folks, the folks with prediabetes. So Chris has been putting in some information about the telemedicine as an ad for us. Again, you've heard it before. I'm going to skip over that. And then we'll get into the 6 conditions for ending lockdown right after Carl gives us this intro. So, who's 6 condition? WHO, 6 conditions for ending lockdown. And again, if you don't really care what WHO has to say, it still might be worth listening or at least thinking about it for a few minutes, because it doesn't matter whether you're talking to Harvard Business Review or WHO or CDC or any number of consultants out there in this space. There are some things that we need to be thinking about. We all want to, I haven't talked to anybody that doesn't want to get back out of lockdown and start resuming life. And I also haven't talked with very many people who know the science behind what's going on and feel very strongly that we should just kick all this bucket and go back and live like we were 6 months ago. Not very, pretty dangerous to do that. So let's think about some background. This was about a week ago, so some of these numbers are already maybe a little bit outdated. For example, at least 82 countries have some form of lockdown. According to UNICEF, I think that might be even more. There are about 250 countries in the world, and I suspect it's a little bit higher than that. Despite personal and economic pains, WHO says it's too soon to go back to normal. And again, even if you don't like WHO, they're not the only guys that are saying this. A premature attempt to restart the economies will trigger a second COVID-19 wave with the deaths associated with it. Now, I've heard a few comments, and I just have to mention that. I've heard so many people say, this is no different from what we would normally have with the seasonal flu and heart attack and stroke. Really? Think about that. Go back and think about what happened in Italy and what happened in New York. Seasonal flu and heart attack and stroke didn't have New Yorkers setting up field hospitals in Central Park. So no, SARS-CoV-2 is lethal, and it is more than what we were just dealing with before. You look at our utilization of healthcare workers, and you can see that. No matter whether the numbers, no matter how many people may have been no matter how many numbers were changed. In other words, this person actually would have been a seasonal flu, or this person actually would have been a heart attack. We got all that. That's true. But again, still put those together, and we weren't doing field hospitals in Central Park. Process must be deliberate and widely coordinated. Again, this is a very infectious agent. It's not something that 1 or 2 employers or 1 or 2 families, 1 or 2 people are going to change their behavior on, and then we're going to be fine. In fact, that is the key thing. It's amazing to see in the US alone, for example, 330 million change behavior as much as we've changed over the past few months. And guess what? It's where we didn't change behavior. It's those pockets where still maintaining major travel in and out that created the risk for the New York area. Maintaining that partying, the several different types of partying, that laissez le bon temps rouler in New Orleans, the Mardi Gras and other festivals, maintaining all of that. Those are the places where we continue to see significant breakouts. And You know, we open up the beaches again in Florida, get a lot of business there, a lot of business in hotels, a lot of travel. We're going to see this stuff open up again in cases. It only takes a couple of weeks to start seeing that case rate follow the folks getting back out into the public. So here's 6 conditions. And again, if you don't like CDC, I mean, if you don't like any of those folks, we're all saying the same thing, almost all. Disease transmission is under control. Health systems are able to detect, test, isolate, and treat every case and trace every contact. Nobody's there yet. You know, the discussion we had yesterday were some of the testings, some of the tests are now becoming available by labs, but hospitals aren't even using them because we can't coordinate our way through IT systems. There's just too much problem getting PPE testing set up, and until we get testing set up, we're not going to be able to do case finding and tracing contacts. So again, if we can't get PPE up and rolling, how do we think we're going to get the testing that we need to manage the outbreak? So that's we're getting closer to number one. We're continue to talk about, are we reaching the peak? In other words, are we getting transmission under control? We're not going to know until we have effective testing. Number two, are we able to detect, isolate, test? Obviously, we can't meet that until we get good access to testing. Number three, hotspot risks are minimized in vulnerable places like nursing homes. I think we're starting to make progress in that area. Number four, schools, workplaces, and other essential places have preventive measures. That is actually the place where I'm seeing more work right now than anywhere. Just a huge amount of work with folks saying, look, this is killing our economy. It's driving me crazy as an individual. I want to get back to work. And so they're starting to say, yep, but we also know that it's dangerous. So what do we do to set up preventive measures to get back to work? The risk of importing new cases, number five, can be managed. It's a little bit unclear in terms of what they actually mean by that. But again, you look at places like Kentucky. Kentucky has actually set up several of its state parks. It's always been well known for having great level state parks. They're taking some of those state parks and saying, look, we've been managing cases at home. There's a little bit of risk to that. We probably will have to do that to a large extent, but for places where we can't, or places where it's better for a case not to be at home, we'll let them go stay at the state park. Chris Cuomo was a great example of that issue. Brother of Governor Cuomo in New York became infected, and sure enough, he infected his wife. So maybe there are better ways of managing folks that have a known case. Communities are fully educated, engaged, and ready to deal with this problem. So let me go back and just see if we can do a clip this time, see if we can hear it. Carl, are you going to do the clip, or you want me to?
I can do the clip.
Have you got it on the timestamp?
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Hope this answers a question that came from Irina Interfax Agency. We will now go to Chile. Marcelo from Chile, El Pingüino Interfax Agency. We will now go to Chile. Marcelo?
Hi, hello, how are you? Can you hear me?
Yes, we are all very well. Please go ahead, Marcelo.
Thank you so much. Good morning, doctor. In Chile, there is several cities in quarantine. Many will be 20 days old. My question is it recommendable to keep this measure thinking about the population mental health?
Thank you. If I understand your question, you said, is it okay to keep these measures while considering people's mental health? And that's an important consideration. There is no doubt that restrictive measures, stay-at-home orders, restriction of movement has been quite isolating for people, and all the more isolating for people who are already isolated or vulnerable. And therefore, as we have always said, lockdowns in their own right are not a solution, but they have those population-wide physical distancing measures have proved quite effective in countries where there's been a rapid escalation of cases, sometimes as a result of not being successful in containing the disease in the first place. Those measures have served to suppress some of the transmission. We have said in our strategy that was released yesterday, and we'll be releasing further technical guidance later today, tomorrow, on the transition strategies that countries have. We do note that in Chile and in other countries in South America, there's been an acceleration in infections, and it did require measures such as that. But those measures need to be replaced with strong public health intervention, case finding, testing, contact tracing, quarantine, community engagement, and in some ways a new norm where communities, all of us, are going to have to adapt to new ways of behavior, new ways of interacting with each other, while we continue to suppress the virus and while we search for a vaccine and therapeutics that will help us to truly suppress both the number of cases and the mortality associated with this virus. Mental health, we have issued guidance on mental health and how to manage mental health. It's been one of the big issues, as you've seen in social media. There's a huge outpouring of support for people. I think communities are supporting each other. There's been an incredible outpouring of solidarity between people. And while we may be physically isolated, I actually have seen amazing stories of us not being socially isolated. It is tough, it's not easy, and it's something we must endure, and we must endure it until we have in place the other measures to suppress this disease. So we've said it very clearly to governments. We must work really hard now to accelerate the investments we need in public health infrastructure, in community engagement and education, and having a hospital system capable of dealing with cases. If we do that, we will be able to make our way out of these more draconian lockdowns. And this is something that the World Health Organization.
Thank you, Carl. So why don't we go on over to the video now? I mean, to the Q&A. Somebody said to me yesterday, I think it was James Cantor, said, I get a lot out of the Q&A, but Doc, you're not doing a good job on transitions. That's true. So, transition. We're done with the program discussion of what are the criteria for return to work? What's the next couple of years going to look like? And now we're talking about Q&A. So, 6,000-foot Mike. Good morning. Thank you for your presentations and helping keep hope alive. Thank you. And there's plenty of hope. Things are just going to change for a while as we start getting our head around how to deal with risks that have been out there. We've just ignored them until they hit us in the face. Jimbo 757, as I said before, who cares what the WHO says? And Nana Buster says the same thing. Oh, no, you didn't. Wait a minute. We've jumped over some things. We'll cover that. Okay, Nana Buster saying, don't trust the WHO. So we got it. You don't like the WHO. Plenty of WHO haters out there. Plenty of CDC haters. You name it. Anybody whose face is up in front of the public are getting a lot of haters out there. And, sometimes that's deserved. I think the CDC could have done better with how they managed the testing process. But we talked about that yesterday. Z50Z6, Joe Riley, $4.99. Thank you so much, Joe. And if any of you would like to donate, you've got several different reminders on how to do it. You can do it with PayPal. You can do it with Patreon. Even on the YouTube Live, you go down to the place where you make a comment. Right next to it, there's a place where you can help us get this information out there and help us keep hope alive. and help us focus people, not so much on the on COVID-19, but the underlying thing that's killing all of us, from heart attack, disabling us from stroke, the number one cause of kidney disease, the number one cause of blindness, number one cause of dementia, and the number one cause of COVID-19 associated with coronavirus. Prediabetes, chronic disease, arterial inflammation. We have, by the way, for those of you who are interested, one of the most popular things that we've developed over the recent past has to do with, it's a webinar activity. And if you'd like to find out, see, most docs don't know how to actually check for prediabetes. They think that you just get a fasting blood sugar and a hemoglobin A1C. Those don't work. If you've got severe problems, it'll show up. But if you've got enough problems to cause a heart attack, stroke, dementia, most of those aren't going to show up on just those tests alone. You need to do a little bit better testing, and we show you how to do that on our webinar programs. You can look that up on our website, prevmedheartrisk.com. And acknowledgement that, yeah, a lot of people don't care what WHO says, but you know what? What they're saying is not that different from what anybody else is saying in this space. Tom Tigner, love your new reminder feature and the automatic startup. Thank you, Tom. I appreciate your interest. Got a lot of comments, just jumped down. If, gosh, let me see if we can find it. Dave Murphy, how are you doing, Dave? I saw a post on a study by Stanford that antigen testing in one California county shows over 50 times the infection rate, which correlates to over 50 times smaller death rate. That was probably the Santa Clarita study. That made a lot of press recently. And there's good and there's bad to it. Obviously, the bad is, if it's true, then there's a lot more infection going on than we think. The bad, I mean, the good on it is, obviously, yes, then that would mean there's a lot fewer deaths per infection than we think. However, before you go too far down that road, that Santa Clarita study, and if we were going to do a lot more of these, just like an hour of these every day, we would probably cover that Santa Clarita study. But there were some problems with that Santa Clarita study, Dave. One of them is this. It's a small study. So they looked at zip codes, and if they got 2 tests back from the zip code, and they said, and one of them was positive, the other was negative, they made the assumption that the infection rate in that zip code area, or that population area, was 50%. The probability of that being true is a major leap. So I would just say, I think we need to go back and put that Santa Clarita study in the larger context, and there's a lot of things that are just falling apart there. I don't think we've had quite the infection rate that they think we have. But that'll become clear over the next, clearer and clearer as we get more test results, which means, of course, we have to get more access to testing. Kevin McCord, Dr. McCord, you're right, Dr. B. The overlooked pandemic is cardiovascular disease and metabolic dysfunction. Adjustment to post-pandemic life means a renewed emphasis on personal health stewardship. Thank you very much, Kevin, Dr. McCord. It's so true. Joe Riley, Super Chat Challenge. Hit that $sign and kick in what you can. Thank you so much, Joe. I appreciate that. And what it'll do is it'll help us, again, continue to pay for the staff to make this kind of information available to folks. Thanks again, Joe. Jerry West, I'm beginning to see an emerging fatalistic view of COVID. People may not agree to stay locked down for months on end. Do you think? It's a big, big deal. Nana Buster. Dr. B, if someone's immune system is robust, how does the virus overwhelm it to become ill, or will immunity knock it out? Well, I mean, even the higher estimates of mortality rate, Nana, are, I love that name, by the way. We've got a few Nanas in our family. Even the higher rates of mortality are like 3%. So that means, even if it's that high, that means 97% of people that get infected, their immune system knocks out the SARS-CoV-2. So how does the virus overwhelm it? I think maybe that's part of your question. And I don't have a good answer for you there. I think we've seen different things that different types of viruses do. This virus, for example, and we've talked about it, we've seen information indicating that it tends to invade some of the immune system itself, like some of the T cells, some of the leukocytes, and sort of hijacks some of the immune system. Part of the bigger challenge is that it's the immune system that's killing us, the inflammation associated with reacting to that virus. So Dave Murphy gave us a super chat for $5. Thank you, Dave. Thanks, Dr. B. Joe, challenge accepted. Thanks, guys. Again, I do appreciate it, and it is a big deal for getting this information out. We offshore most of our work. We have 3 folks here in the States, Michelle Hamilton in Florida, Janice and myself up here in Lexington, and we've got several folks, Carl, Lori, for example, Paul and Chris are in the Philippines, and $5 is $5 US is a big deal in the Filipino economy. New webinar series available now. Go to the care.prevmedheartrisk.com webinar to sign up. So thank you very much for making us aware. And again, guys, we need to be focusing a little bit more on that, I think, than the telemedicine. Nana Buster. Okay, we covered that. Jackie Shaheen, as a physician, what is your opinion regarding self-ordered tests for vitamin A, D, and C? Clearly vitamin D, because most of us actually have suboptimal levels of vitamin D. I test everybody, or recommend testing for everybody in terms of patients for vitamin D. The labs still continue to list normals of 25 to 40. The reality is the science has changed. I've actually seen one lab, Quest did it on one of their lab reports, did more of a 40 to 60 level for vitamin D. The numbers that I would recommend are 60 to 80. Vitamin D can be painful or can be destructive, actually lethal. But I've investigated that, and you don't see any significant deaths associated with vitamin D until you get up to like 110, 115. So 60 to 80 is a much better level. People think that there are major racial components to it. There are major components of latitude, major components of how much sunshine you get. I tell you, I've got people from all races, all latitudes, all levels of habits of getting out in the sunshine. And I really don't think that the sunshine issue is as reliable as many people think. In terms of testing for vitamins A and C, I do recommend supplementation with C for sure. I've gone back to that. I've flip-flopped on it a couple of times. I haven't done testing for levels, though, or for A. So Bob Bell, while no one likes the effect on our daily life, the protests seem to be limited to dozens, hundreds, or maybe even low thousands of protesters, not significant to the hundreds of millions of citizens. That's true. Actually, I think overall as a society, we've done better than I would have predicted in terms of the changes that we've had to make. So It's a good point. Dave Ferguson, in your video on 4/16/20, you said that for general health, diet is number 1, 2, and 3. There are a zillion diets and diet books. Which one is the healthiest? Please, only one. Well, that's a great question, David. Ferguson, I think. Ferguson. I wish it were a simple answer. To simplify it the most, though, I think you'd say number 1, the biggest component of diet has to do with your BMI, your amount of body fat index, or body mass index, the amount of body fat that you have, because body fat is it's not an inert energy storage tissue. It is a very active endocrine tissue, which creates a whole lot of the problem that we have with chronic diseases. So first of all, managing your diet to decrease fat. Very much related, and that's driven mostly by 2 things. Number 1, this tends to be, you see some of these problems now with obese 20-year-olds and teenagers, but the vast majority of this problem is for baby boomers. And for baby boomers, the majority of us have prediabetes. We just don't know it yet, and we haven't tested effectively for it. That's what that webinar is all about. If you have prediabetes, if you're starting to develop insulin resistance to insulin, then here's the question: should you be eating a lot of carbs which your body cannot digest? And the answer is obvious if you think about it. So it's no surprise that when you start looking at diets, for that majority of us who have prediabetes, we need to be watching our carbs. You start watching your carbs, and it makes a big, big difference in terms of your ability to lose that body fat. I hope that helps. You know, you've got a lot of people that talk about diets as crazy as the plant-based diet, or on the other end of the spectrum, you go from total veganism to total carnivore diet. And pardon me for those of you who caught my word crazy. It's crazy that we have that kind of variation, and it's crazy that we have that kind of debate on what's the best. But here's why. The science is not that clear. One thing that is crystal clear is BMI, or relative fat mass, so the amount of body fat that you have. How you get there in terms of managing it is, again, not quite as clear as you might think. David, I thought, well, I did the best I could for simplifying a very, very hot debated topic. Hotly debated. Skunk Ape, Doc, is it always bad to drink vodka in the morning? Interesting question. James Cantor, David Ferguson, Dr. Brewer has said low sugar. Yep, watch those carbs if you can't digest them. Very simple. Skunk Ape, take your ridiculous comments elsewhere. Thank you, Bart. Dave Murphy, thanks for the clarification on the study. I tried to find the actual study and couldn't locate it. Chuck, hi Doc, I'm not clear where we go from here. Do businesses not allow uninfected employees to go back to work? Is this the end of Walmart greeters? Interesting, I saw some comments about that. The major focus, again, in terms of return to work, obviously, if you start reading about it, and it's very true, there's more and more focus on, gosh, do I have the antibody? And do folks that have the antibody, are they at major advantage to the rest of us? And I think the answer is pretty clear, yes. But then you get into more questions about, how do we know for sure they have the antibody? As we talked about, those that think they have the antibody right now that didn't go through the disease, even in a good antibody test, and a lot of them aren't good, even with a good one, you get a positive antibody test, and your probability of having a false positive is almost as high is the probability of having a true positive. So do you really want to trust that antibody test right now and go out there? Reminds me of the scene in Dirty Harry. Are you feeling lucky? Dave Murphy, thank you. And thank you again, Joe Riley. Higher D levels make me feel a lot better overall. And they make a lot of people feel better overall. Good morning, Doc. I hope you didn't breathe any biscuit breath on Mrs. Janice this morning. So she's referring back to when we had our first child, and we were talking about, you know, the father being in labor and delivery, and sometimes the mother being a little bit grumpy about that. Janice got us up. I remember 2 in the morning, I heard this scraping. And you know how when you're really, really sleepy and you start hearing weird stuff, it pulled me out of a dream. And I realized Janice was down making Jell-O. So I knew what that meant. I knew that she wanted to get some Jell-O before she went in for delivery. We went in a few hours later. I was still waiting in labor and delivery. And Janice was doing her thing. And this cart came through the labor and delivery hallway, and they had these big old biscuits. That was at a time when I was still eating carbs, and I had one. It was really good. I couldn't eat all of it because it's so big. But I remember they had Janice stand up and push against the wall, and they had me stand there supporting her, and she did that, and she said, "Oh, just get away from me, biscuit breath." So that's the story. Joe Riley, eat more fat to reduce body fat. Exactly right. The Shimobi. I'm 90% carnivore. My thumb joints hurt when I eat plants. Very interesting. And one of the advantages on the carnivore that you hear about is that it's a great, you know, I can't remember the term they use, but it's like a removal diet. You can remove all of the things, like, you know, any potential lectins, leptins, all of that. All of those potential things that you might be allergic to. And I think there's validity to some of those comments. Dave Murphy, for the diet question, wouldn't whatever diet keeps your insulin in line be the best? Absolutely. And that's why I focused on low carb, because most of us have a carb metabolism problem. Genetics do play a role. Everybody has a study of one. Absolutely. You know, I've got some bad, you know, I've never been heavy. The highest my BMI has been like 24. And usually it's like it is now, 21 or so. Varies between 20 and 22. But I developed prediabetes in my mid-50s. Why is that? Well, I do have the heart attack gene, significant components of it, 9p21, 9th chromosome, the p21 area. But I also have a couple of other things. One of those things was my dad was north of 350 pounds. Also my height, 5'10". So he was obese when I was conceived. We've already demonstrated that in lab animals that actually increases risk for diabetes and prediabetes. Perhaps a bigger thing was I was a 10.5-pound baby when I was born. So you think about that. We used to think a fat baby was healthy and happy. And what we have found out since then is that, no, every ounce before over 8.5 ounces greatly increases your probability of having prediabetes as you get older. So yes, it's all about genetics, but it's also about epigenetics as well. Genetics loads the gun and lifestyle pulls the trigger. And it's not just your lifestyle, it's also your parents. Carnivore keto worked fantastic for me, but may not be the best for everybody. It's a good point. It's a very good point. Jackie Shaheen, 2 Toromixin hemoperfusion device, which removes sepsis-causing endotoxins from blood, approved for compassionate use at select hospitals. Does the public have a right to know which hospitals? Yeah, that's a great question, and I don't know the answer to that. One of the things, they're also using remdesivir. That's been available for, it's an antiviral drug. It's been available at compassionate use for a lot of places. And again, it's really more of a patient luck item if you happen to be in that area. In terms of patient luck, you know, once you get to that point where they're considering these, you're in big trouble already. It's like people talking about, well, maybe the respirators are causing some of the damage and don't go on a respirator. There's some truth to that. I think the respirators they've learned a lot about respirator use since they've started doing this. But I think what people tend to ignore is the fact that, yep, you're in bad shape by the time the decision is made to put you on a respirator. You're already in a rarefied air in terms of response to this virus. Dave Murphy, I combine it with intermittent fasting. Dave, you know, just to let you know, I have countless numbers of people that come to see me that have lost 30 pounds. In fact, most of my new patients have lost 30 pounds or more. And all of them but 2 have done it in a very, very similar way. Number one, they cut the carbs. And one of the things that happens when you cut carbs, and you can see this in books like Robert Lustig's book, David Ludwig's book, both of them they're endocrinologists. Lustig's on the West Coast, Ludwig's on the East Coast at Harvard. They're both managing obesity units at their respective universities. And they've said the same thing. Look, you stop changing your insulin response when you cut the carbs out of your diet, as you mentioned a minute ago. And then once you do that, you start leveling off, your hunger decreases. And then you start adding things like Walter Longo and Sachin Panda talked about in terms of closing that feeding window. And patient after patient after patient coming to me that's lost 30 pounds or more has said, yep, that's exactly what I did. First, I dropped the carbs. My hunger went down. Then I started closing my feeding window. So very, very good way to end the show. Thank you so much, guys, for your interest. And I will, we plan to be here tomorrow. And if you want us to continue providing this on a daily basis, please let us know. Thank you for your interest.